Here's a day in the life of a game developer where I recorded what happened over the course of a day. On this particular day, I got up at 7 a.m. I went downstairs, and I usually don't have any breakfast, but in this case, I felt a little parched, but I was also craving some sugar, so I had some ice cream for breakfast, maybe like a scoop or so. Then I may have showered, I'm not sure, but I gathered myself, I picked out an outfit, and at 7:30 I started my commute. When I'm commuting to work, I have a pretty short commute. I intentionally chose an apartment or a house nearby where I work so that I could cut down on that. The worst commute I've ever had in my career was maybe like an hour long. I was commuting from, I think it's called uh, Williamsburg, maybe, into New York City. And the commute was like an hour long. Or no, sorry, it was Brooklyn. I was living in Brooklyn, I think. And it was like an hour long commute on the New York City subway, and it was hell. Oh my God, I hated it so much. I was like, if I have to do this commute, I will just get a new job. I'd rather move across the country. Um, but thankfully, my commutes now are not so bad. And a few times, oh, back in the day, my wife would drive me to work, and that was nice too. But now I'm commuting on my own, and I'm listening to podcasts. Normally, recently, I've been listening to a lot of political stuff because there's a lot of political stuff going on in the country right now. But some of my other favorite podcasts are Sightseeing Japan is one I love. And I also do this thing where I will listen to YouTube videos as well. I can't really watch YouTube videos while driving because that would be rather unsafe. But I use this app, which I'm sure is like banned from YouTube, called I think it's called TubeMate. Let me see. And basically, what this allows you to do, it's an amazing app. You can download the videos and then you can play them when you're offline. So that is super helpful. I use it a lot, particularly if I'm, yeah, it's called TubeMate. I use it when I'm like going to go traveling. And so I might not have some Wi Fi connection. So I could just download, or even if I'm on an airplane or something like that, I download a ton of videos. And one of the things that you can do with this software is you could just play the audio. So that's typically what I do. I get like a bunch of videos. I like video essays and stuff like that. Um, and then, yeah, I just play the audio. So that's how I do my commute. Takes maybe 20 minutes on the long end, short end, I don't know, 15 to 30 minutes, let's say it takes me to drive. And so I get over to my office, usually takes about half an hour, let's say. And then in this case, I got to the office around 7:40. So that seems like 10 minutes later. So that was a really fast commute. This is probably because I was leaving a bit early. Typically, the traffic is like pretty bad around the 9 a.m. area. So I try to leave a bit before 9 and get there at 9. At my office, we don't have, I think, like a requirement that you have to clock in at a certain point. And people kind of just roll in um, around 9. Like, people are fairly consistent, but like not all the same. So, like, for example, I have one person who I work with who's consistently at work at like 10 a.m., and then somebody else is pretty much always showing up at like 8:45. So I'd say like every individual person is pretty consistent, so you kind of know when to find them, but I wouldn't say everybody arrives at the same time. We do have core hours though. At least I think we do. So I think you're supposed to be there from 9 to 5, but I'm not sure. So, anyways, I get on to the office, and the first thing that I'm doing is I'm setting up my computer and I am trying to prepare myself for the day. And this is important because sometimes the preparation takes a while, and so I want to get that started as soon as possible because I can do it asynchronously. So, what that preparation might look like is syncing latest with my Perforce and then actually generating a build with the latest code. Um, Typically, I try to do that maybe like the night before because waiting for a build can take as long as an hour, and that can sap time that I could otherwise be doing, actual creative work. So if I haven't done that, then this is what I'm doing on this particular morning. I didn't do it the day before. So basically, I'm coming into the office, I'm getting latest, which is, if you're not familiar with that concept, basically you're downloading whatever people have recently changed to the code base. We use Perforce, which is kind of the industry standard for version control. but there are other options out there. And so I get latest, and then I'm starting to build, and that might take, in this case, I think it was like half an hour. So while I'm doing that, I kind of set that up, and while it's loading, I switch over to answering my emails, following up on Slack messages, and yeah, I think that, and maybe like scheduling my to-do list for the day. Every day I kind of take out a little post-it note and I manually convert my calendar because I have a work calendar and I have a Google calendar, and I've tried many times to combine them, but I find that I actually just prefer to have a physical written out list that I can cross things off and add things in. And so on this particular day, I wrote down some work meetings I had. I wrote down some personal meetings I had, and I just kind of put them all together into an agenda. Uh, I only really list the meetings that I have to go to on my to-do list, and it's basically assumed that every minute I'm not in a meeting, I'm doing my actual work. I'm an independent contributor, right? When you're in game development, or I guess all of software, you could be a people manager or an independent contributor where you're either working on your own, which is what I do, or you're kind of managing a team. And so as somebody who works on my own, I need to try and focus on being in meetings less typically and just creating output. So it depends. Obviously, you can get work done in meetings, but for the most part, meetings are like not really a time that work gets done, I would say, for my particular discipline. Usually, a meeting is there to discuss the work, review the work, or plan the work, but the actual work happens mostly solo for my particular discipline. Okay, so the other thing, so you'll hear this often, like there's this methodology that swept the nation called Scrum, okay? And it's still present in a lot of ways. There are remnants of Scrum, right? This sort of Scrum came from the Air Force, and it got adopted hardcore by software engineers. And a lot of people don't like Scrum, but there are elements of it that I think teams have found incredibly useful. And one of them is a daily check-in. Now, daily check-ins in a Scrum team will often be in a stand-up meeting. So the premise of this meeting is that everybody shows up and you stand up during the meeting. It should be so short that nobody needs to sit down, and that's why it's called a stand-up meeting. The idea is we're all standing, we do our quick reports, and then we can disperse, right? If somebody needs to go into a monologue and take a while and, oh man, I'm getting tired, I need to sit down, then that is kind of against the idea of a stand-up. So what I've found is that a lot of companies have realized this is mostly a waste of time. It's useful for independent contributors to kind of listen to other contributors, but for the most part, the stand-up is primarily for the people manager to kind of touch base with his different, peons. So what a lot of companies have transitioned to is instead of having everybody stand up in the same physical space, you'll just kind of do a post online. And so that's the case that this company uses, where basically we have a Slack channel, which is basically just for updates. And so, at some point throughout the day, you give a stand-up status update. I typically do mine in the morning so I don't forget, but I've seen a lot of people also not do their update until maybe the afternoon. So I guess there's no real established requirement there. It's just try to get it in, I suppose, by the end of the day. And typically, that's saying, what did you get done yesterday? And then what do you plan to do today? That's typically how stand-ups go. So in this case, I was talking about how I'm working on a long-term project and I'm still working on it. And I mentioned kind of what intermediate progress I had made. So that's probably my most common meeting. Other meetings that I have are, we do meet in person for an in-person stand-up, but that only happens 2 times a week so that people can focus on actually doing the work. We don't have that kind of like daily update in person. So when it comes to this in-person meeting, we split it up where people who are working on gameplay will do their update on Tuesday, and then people who are working on game systems will do their projects on Thursday. And game systems is kind of a catch-all because a lot of other stuff gets thrown in there as well. Thursday meeting is kind of like the catch-all meeting, and then Tuesday is basically just gameplay because gameplay always takes forever to go through. This is, by the way, a meeting with the whole engineering department. And so I think maybe there's like 20 people there. Like we have a pretty small team, so everybody could probably fit in a room, but there are people who are remote, so there's also always like a virtual presence as well. And so if it's a Tuesday and we're going to have that meeting as well, we're going to go into this room, they're going to go around the horn and kind of say it's basically just a longer version of the stand up. The difference here is that you can kind of ask questions to somebody, and this is a really good time for those independent contributors to kind of perk up their ears and listen to what other people are doing. It's often the case that if you're working on a software project with other people, someone might say, "Hey, I'm working on this," and you might be like, "Hey, I've already done that. Try this instead." So, it could be useful for that context. Okay, so anyways, what am I doing after my meetings? So I'm starting my work as an independent contributor. I am typically trying to always keep my headphones on. I'm somebody who doesn't like my ears, I guess, unprotected because I don't want to hear conversations that people are having because I find it distracting because I'm just a generally very curious person. So I try to always have my headphones on and just try to be listening to something. What I'm listening to kind of varies depending on how much of my brain I need at the time. So I have let's say, if I'm doing a task and it is very mindless, because sometimes maybe you're just waiting for something or it's a very mindless task, then I can put on something that has some more content. So I might be able to listen to a YouTube video or a podcast, but typically I have to be engaged in the work. And because of that, I can't like follow something that has a plot. Instead, I'll be listening to something more like music. And I love discovering new music. So I subscribe to this service called Spotify, and it creates a playlist that is a unique kind of playlist to help you discover songs every week called Discover Weekly. So I listen to that primarily as kind of my number one source of like music exploration. And I'm always trying to listen to like new weird shit. I love kind of finding a new song basically. And so that is something that I can engage with, but sometimes I need to be even more focused. And so listening to a new song can be too distracting. So in that case, I'll go to a song that I know, like I have a liked playlist and it's all songs that I've heard before. And so that could be way less distracting. So I might listen to that. But there's another level and even further where I might need to be super, super focused. I can't hear any lyrics. And so if I can't hear any lyrics, then I have a number of albums that I'll go to that are specifically instrumental music. And so it's the instrumental music that I can listen to if I am just need to be way too focused. I can't hear anybody talking basically because that's too distracting in itself. And so artists that I'll typically go to are Buckethead. He's got a lot of great music that's kind of like instrumental guitar work, something like Electric Tears or Shattered something. He has really good albums in that genre. Another artist who I like is L1011, who has a number of like really good just kind of instrumental tracks. Okay, so that's typically what I'm listening to throughout the day, and I'm working, I'm coding. At this point, probably my build is finished. I could jump into whatever I was up to. In this particular day, I was trying to port some data, and this is like a big project I've been working on for the really the whole week, and I'm working in a framework called the Unreal Engine, which is basically a large tool or a set of tools that people use to develop games. And the Unreal Engine does a lot of things really well, but there's some things that they've done that probably they wouldn't have done if they had the chance to do it again, right? You might call that not a mistake per se, but hindsight's 2020. So they probably would have changed their perspective. And so one of the things that Unreal Engine has done that's really annoying is pretty much everything is binary data. Like almost every asset in the game engine is a binary asset. Binary assets are kind of a pain in the ass because you can't do a lot of things with them. They're not human readable, so you can't hand edit them. And also, you can't resolve merge conflicts with them, which is a whole nother thing. But basically, this is a bit of a limitation of the game engine. There are other engines I've worked in. For example, I just worked at this company called id, and they have their own game engine, and they wisely made like almost all of it text documents. So you can very easily do a search throughout the entire game engine and figure out where a particular asset is referenced because you could write a scraper that literally just goes through every file and reads for a particular substring. You can't do that in Unreal, so that's a bit of a frustration. Long story short, this limitation has led to somebody who's really awesome on my team named John developing a sort of novel technology that will allow us to create assets in a human readable format, okay, in a text format. And so what I've been working on throughout, I guess, this job on and off, but in particular for this week, is porting some assets from this native Unreal Engine data type, which is binary in nature, into this diffable text format. So what that requires is basically going through a particular data type, seeing everywhere that it's referenced, creating a new parallel data type that is in this diffable text format, and then writing code that will automatically port the existing binary data into this text format. So I wouldn't say that's inherently a difficult task. I think if anything, it's just very onerous. There's a lot of steps and a lot of things you got to look at as part of it. But it does take time. And I'm trying to kind of establish workflows so that I can get through it faster in the future, because I've done this task a few times now for various data types, and it's still a bit of a slog. But I'm learning things along the way. I'm making mistakes. I'm writing up guides every time I make a mistake. So an example of the nature of a mistake is, and again, this is more information than you probably need to know, but I find that kind of zooming in with particular fidelity on kind of some of the things I'm thinking about in my day, like what kind of music I'm listening to or what kind of problems I'm solving as an engineer, is giving you a bit of an insight into kind of what's going through my head on a day-to-day basis. So I know this is probably more information than you want to know, but feel free to jump around the video kind of as we zoom in and out of these different topics with varying levels of fidelity. But basically, the context of what am I talking about? Damn it. I lost my train of thought. Okay, we are talking about this data type. Oh yeah, and I'm saying what mistakes I've made. So just so you have an example of like a mistake that I would have made. So one mistake that I made is in the Unreal Engine, there are a number of places where you might inject code to do the logic of porting a particular data type from, let's say, this binary asset format into this more lightweight text format. And two of the functions that I considered, which are kind of the standard UObject functions, are serialize and postload. And serialize seems like the intuitive one to use. However, this kind of cost me maybe a day, if not a few hours at least, of work, kind of that I got stuck and I was trying to figure out, like, why is this not working? Is I originally wrote this code in the serialize function. And the issue that I hadn't run into before in the process of this this kind of porting task is if your data type references a member, if it has a member variable, which is itself a pointer to a different data type, when that outer data type has its serialize method called, it may not have yet serialized the inner member variable data type. And so as a result of that, when I had injected my code into the serialize function, it was serializing the data except for this one pointer to a different data member, right? And so the result of that was part of the data was not actually being serialized. So I transitioned to using the post load, and that resolved the issue because basically at the time of post load, the outer data type and all of its inner data types have been loaded. So that's just kind of like an example. Like I tried to do it in one place, it didn't work, and then I moved my code to a different place, and then I was able to get it to work. So this is like a very, very common, let's say, shape of a problem that like a coder might face. But this was one thing in particular that I was struggling with on the day that I wrote these notes of what I was up to. All right, so the next entry I have is around 9:45 a.m. and this is where I ran into the issue. So it sounds like I was probably working from, I guess, when I got to the office around 8 to around 10. And it was at this point that I kind of figured out that I'm running into an issue. And I think it's at this point that I was able to basically fix it. So yeah, that was around. So now we're around like 10 a.m. here. It's about 10 a.m. that basically most people have rolled into the office. I got there a bit early this day, but I'm usually there kind of somewhere between 8:45 and 9:30. I try to get there at 9 if I can, but sometimes I either leave late or I run into traffic and it doesn't happen. But pretty much everybody is there by 9, and the parking lot goes from completely empty to like very full. And so at this case, it's about 10 a.m., and I wrote down that I had a bit of a chat with some coworkers. I cannot remember. Oh, I know what this is actually. So I would say that the team that I'm working on right now, relative to other teams I've worked on, is not very social. And it kind of depends what like department you're in, but in this particular department, there are basically no social activities. There's nothing scheduled in terms of like team building, and yeah, that totally sucks. It's probably not what I would do if I was in a different position, but it's the culture that the powers that be have decided to do, and so there are a number of people in other departments that I think don't like that. And so one producer in particular sponsored this idea that, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to meet, I think it's every week for like half an hour to an hour, and we're just going to have like a social chat. And so on this particular day, I attended the social chat, and I don't remember what we talked about, but we had a social chat. Usually we're just talking about like what games you guys playing and things like that, because we're game developers, so the thing we've all got in common is we love to play games. All right, so I had that chat with some coworkers. I'm probably working at the same time or doing builds. It's kind of like something you would have on the side, basically a Slack huddle. You're chatting with people in a video chat format, but at the same time, you're probably like waiting for things to load or typing on your computer, something like that, and just kind of jumping into the conversation when it's relevant to talk about something. All right, so it was 11:30 a.m. here, and it's at that point that I took a break from work to meet with somebody else who works in my office but on a different team, because he was giving away, or I should say he was selling an Oculus, which I actually have right here. So this is an Oculus. This is a headset for virtual reality. I worked in virtual reality briefly once upon a time for a company named Facebook, and I didn't really like VR, to be honest. I'm not a big VR fan, but my wife actually loves this game called Beat Saber, and I was told that we could actually play the game together. So I bought the Oculus because he was giving it away used, and this is like version 1. They're on like version 3 now, I think. So he was giving it away for like $50. So I was like, okay, that seems like a great deal. So I met up with him, and he gave it to me. And so far, I've played like there's a number of like free demos, so I've been enjoying that. But I'm actually surprised at how expensive a lot of these VR games are. I wonder if there's something like a Game Pass for VR games. I'm not sure, but I think they probably know that if you can afford a VR headset, you can probably afford a bit of an expensive game. So it is what it is. But basically, I got this VR headset with this guy, and at 12 o'clock, we had lunch. So the way that lunch works at this office is they cater one day a week. In my particular job right now, you have to go into the office 3 out of 5 days a week, and they will always cater on Wednesdays. So I guess that means that I had done this on a Wednesday, because on this particular day, there was catered food. So I went to the mess hall, I ate some food, and I chatted with some friends during lunch. One of the things that I wrote down we had talked about is a friend of mine, a coworker, is working on a Godot project. So we talked about that a little bit. Godot is another one of these game engines that people might use. And so I'm not sure what we were talking about, but basically he's probably saying, hey, I'm working on a Godot game. And I asked him about that. And then the next thing we talked about was Deadpool. So Deadpool is a movie that is coming out. Well, at the time of making this video, it's just come out, and I'm actually going to be seeing it later today, which I'm very excited about. But I don't remember what we were talking about. We were just talking about the movie, and I think we were discussing whether or not Deadpool should be seen in 3D, because a friend of mine, Keith, who I'm going to see the movie with today, convinced me that I should purchase the 4D ticket. He said that it's going to be totally worth it. So I decided to go along with it. I'm going to try to watch this movie in 4D. But what they were saying is, my coworkers, they're like, yeah, you don't need to see that movie in 4D. You need to see the new Twisters movie in 4D because it's got wind and rain and crazy stuff. So I have no idea what this Deadpool experience is going to be. Maybe I should make a different video about that. But as of right now, I I don't know what I'm getting myself into, so we'll see. But basically, that's something we were chatting about. All right, so at 1 p.m., so I think I had probably gotten back to work around like 12:40. I started doing a little bit of work, and then at 1 p.m. I took another break to handle a personal meeting that I have. The context of that is I'm currently working on a little side project to build out a to write a book. Basically, I've already written this book. If you follow this channel for a while, you might be familiar with it. But I'm currently chatting with a potential publisher to get it sold on a wider distribution. So I chatted with this guy for half an hour, just talking about kind of my options there on the phone. We have conference rooms that you could book, and we also have these conference rooms that are like these little, I mean, they look like phone booths, and you kind of just go into one, slide the door closed, and you could talk on the phone with relative privacy. It's less about privacy, I think, and more about just like not annoying people by talking kind of in the pit on the floor. But I just had a quick conversation with him, kind of a personal call, talking about how that's going and kind of some discussions there. Around 1:30, I'm jumping back into the work and continuing on some problems. Okay, so at around 2:10 p.m., I got stuck again. And in this case, okay, what I got stuck on was I had completed the code that I needed in order to port the data from this binary format to the text format. However, I didn't know what assets in particular needed to be ported. The data type that I had converted was something called an animation event, which shows up within the context of an animation montage, which is what Unreal Engine calls its animations. But I didn't know which animation montages I would need to open because I didn't know where this event was being used. So I wasn't sure, like, how do I search the code base to find the examples of this animation event, right? Something that would have been trivially easy in another studio, like the id studio I worked at, where, like I said, I could just do a text scrape, or I could just search for this anim event underscore whatever the name is. In Unreal, you can't do that. And while they do have something for searching for references, the Unreal Engine Asset Reference Viewer only works for assets, and an animation event is not considered an asset. It's like a data type. It's an abstract kind of data type that can kind of be referenced anywhere. And there's no way to kind of search the code base to see which anim montages use this anim event. At least you can't do that without code. And so I then went over to a friend of mine, Eugene, who is an amazing programmer, one of those people who's like, must have been born in the Unreal Engine because he knows this place very well. I asked him what his advice would be for kind of facing this issue. And he pretty quickly just said to me that I should check out something called an editor utility blueprint. I think that's the term. And so he basically just gave me this keyword because I didn't really know. This is one of those cases where like you don't know what you don't know, right? So I wasn't sure how to face this problem. I went into his office. I asked him this question, and he said, "That's what you got to do. You got to look at the editor blueprint utility thing." So that keyword was basically all I needed. I went back to my desk, I did some Google searching, and I watched some YouTube videos that kind of explained how you can use this particular kind of blueprint, which is a scripting system, in order to write some code that can kind of scrape your editor assets to see which ones are relevant, in this case, for my port. And that was exactly the right answer, as is usually the case when I talk to this guy, Eugene. He always knows what to do. So I was very grateful of that. And that kind of got me unstuck. So let me see what I did here. So yeah, then I was basically watching these YouTube videos for the next hour or two, trying out some of the approaches that they had advised. And it was about 4 p.m. that I took another break to do like a little conference call. I have another personal conference call. In this case, it was for a organization that I volunteer for. So I volunteer for this organization called Code 2040. And their mission is basically empowering historically disenfranchised youth in, gaining experience in order to develop careers within the tech industry. And so for this particular meeting, we were talking about, you know, as being one of the mentors in this organization, I work with a number of different mentees, which are called fellows. And this was a meeting with a number of other mentors to discuss sort of how we can better engage the mentees, particularly people who like don't have an internship for the summer. So they're kind of more in that exploratory phase. Like, how can we engage these fellows and have, you know, them be productive and stuff like that. So I think I don't remember the meeting 100%, but one of the things I remember talking about was advocating for um like, I forget the term, but like artifacts from from like your experiences with your mentees, because I find that a lot of the advice I give, like someone will ask me a question and then another student will ask me the same question. And eventually I got tired. I mean, my story is I got tired of like helping people out so much individually. I decided, let me just make a YouTube channel and then I can make a video and then whoever wants to watch it can watch it. So that's, I mean, and that's kind of why we're here today, making a YouTube video, isn't it? Because somebody asked a question and, you know, other people wanted to know the thing. And I'm like, you know, this might be interesting for other people to know. So I might as well make it a YouTube video. So in the case of this conversation, they were talking about mentees, and I was like, it would be really valuable if, you know, you see somebody has a question, we should write it down and try to make some sort of document or shareable format, whether it's a YouTube video, a guide, whatever. And that's the premise of that meeting. So that's what we talked about. Okay, so that meeting was quick. I think it was like 30 minutes. And so then I'm back to work. And then I worked until for the next basically 2.5 hours finishing up my project. So that took me to 6:30 p.m. So around 6:30 p.m., I left work to go do something else. I typically work from 9 a.m. to 5:30. And then I usually put in about an hour or two, probably about an hour per day in addition to that. So I would say like in a typical work week, I don't know what that's probably. Oh my God, sorry. I just leaned on my door and nearly fell into my closet. That would have been very scary. Let me lean on this wall here because I'm getting tired. This meeting is longer than a stand-up meeting. So yeah, what I was saying is that typically I get to work, from like 9 to 5, and I'm working maybe like 9 to 5:30. So I think that's maybe a 9 or 10 hour workday. And so on top of that, I'm usually either working like an hour at home every day, or I'm working a few hours on the weekend, which is not something I like to do necessarily, but I feel like I'm still kind of playing catch up with respect to learning a number of new technologies my team uses. And so as a result of that, it takes time. It takes time to watch videos and educate myself and basically try to catch up to where I want to be. So that's usually what my time looks like. And this particular day, I was there a little bit later because I had taken some breaks to do those phone calls, as I mentioned, and because I wanted to go to this event after work that was nearby my office, closer to my office than my home. So I figured, why drive all the way back home to then go to this event? Might as well just spend an extra hour at the office, get some extra work done, and then I'll just go straight from the office to this event. So that's what I did. In this particular case, I was going to a board game night. So there's a local bar nearby me, and they host like a get-together where you can play some board games with people. And so that's what I did. I went out to this bar. I played some board games with people, made some new friends, and I had a good time. So that was that. Then I came home, I guess maybe like 8 or 9 p.m., and I don't have any other entries here. So I'm assuming I know I ate dinner at that place, and then I came back here. And one of the things that happened was I had ordered a burger, and then I went up to the bar and I canceled the burger order because I wasn't actually trying to order a I'm sorry. I'd eaten the first burger, okay? I ordered a burger, I ate a burger. Then I tried to like close out my tab on this app, and I fat fingered it, which is to say I pushed the wrong button. And what that did was it automatically sent a new burger order. And that's not what I wanted at all. I only needed one burger. So I went up to the bar and I was like, hey guys, can we cancel this? And they're like, yeah, sure, we'll cancel it for you. And they didn't. They lied to me. And the result was I didn't get charged for it, but a second burger arrived at my table. And I was telling everybody, yo, guys, I'm not hungry. I don't need this burger. They're like, dude, it's your burger. Just take the burger and go. So I went to the bar. I told them about my situation. And the lady there was like, okay, yeah, I'll get you a to go box. Don't worry about it. And then she gave me the box. And then she winked at me because like other people were there. And she was clearly trying to say, like, yo, your secret's safe from me. You're not going to be charged for that extra burger. But it kind of pissed me off because I was like, of course I'm not going to get charged for this burger. I had told you before they had even made it that I didn't want this burger. It's because your damn app is broken. So I just kind of annoyed me because I was like, you're not doing me a favor. Anyways, I took my burger and I brought it home and I had that for lunch the next day. But basically, I go home and I don't even remember what I did. I think I just basically fell asleep because I've been very tired recently, adjusting to a time zone change after taking a trip to the Far East. So now I'm back on the Pacific time zone, and I've definitely got some serious jet lag still that I'm still working with, like a week later. But that was a day in the life. So a bit long-winded, I'm sure, but that's what happened to me. And if you enjoyed this video, you should know that it came as a result of a question I received from a student named David. And so David had asked me, what's a day in the life of game development like? But he also asked me a few other questions, which I'm going to answer now. And if you're interested in a day in the life, you might be interested in these other questions as well. So feel free to stick around, or if not, let me know in the comments section whether or not you're a game developer, if your day is a bit different than mine, or if you're not, what you thought about it. How does this day compare to your day job, whatever that might be? All right, so these other questions from David. Let's see what he said here. He said, hey, I'm new to game development. I began learning before I started university around 5 years ago and haven't done much since then. I started a project in Game Maker 2 and in Unity, but I had never finished them. I only got 50% through. This is a very common issue with game devs. They never finish things. It's a big problem. I'll be attending RIT for my master's in computer science, and I'm still figuring out what I want to do career-wise. I plan on studying AI and ML and am interested in the gaming industry. Okay, David, there's a lot to talk about there before we even get to your questions. So, first thing, this is a common mistake, but I work in something called the game development industry. The gaming industry is its own term, and it specifically relates to casinos. Okay, they were around much earlier than the video game industry. And so when you say the gaming industry, this is talking about things like developing slot machines and like things that are literally gambling. So you probably meant game development industry. Common misconception there, but gaming industry is kind of something different. Okay, so yeah, you want to go into the game development industry. Okay, so I mean, my advice to you, sir, would be, I know you didn't ask for this advice, but I feel like a master's degree is a depth study, DEPTH. Whereas if you're trying to explore things and figure out what you even want to do, that's really a breadth study, BREADTH. Okay, it's a breadth study where you probably want to be exploring a number of different things. So I would strongly advise against investing the money that it would take to do a master's degree, especially at a good university like RIT, if you don't even know what you want to do. This is really the time that you should be doing something like an internship, if you haven't already pursued one in undergraduate studies, and trying out those experiences to test whether or not you like something. And then once you figure out what you like, you can go deep and do a master's study. Sometimes the master's study is kind of bullshit, and you could even just tack it on as like a 4+1 thing, and that's its own situation. But unless you want to go into education, higher education where you need like a master's degree to teach, I think that at most schools, a master's degree for computer science is a waste of time. I'll go further on to say that there's a bit of a situation in America, the United States of America, where basically there's definitely a strong bias against vocational studies or what you might call trade schools. And so as a result of that, a lot of stuff has kind of been like, let's say, pseudo intellectualized, and industries that are definitely not, let's say, focused in a great need for higher academia are getting like degrees within the context of higher academia regardless. So an example of that would be in the United States of America, you can't study software engineering. To my understanding, there isn't a software engineering degree, whereas a lot of other countries will disambiguate computer science and software engineering as separate degrees. In the United States, everybody's a computer scientist because then it's a 4-year degree, right? And you can charge somebody a lot more money, and they'll pad that with, maybe liberal arts education or something like that. You might take a lot of classes in such a way that you are, to a degree, overeducated and studying things that are probably not relevant to a career task. This is exemplified by the emergence of these more trade school based, vocational focused schools where you can sometimes do a class with, they call them boot camps, but it's really just a vocational trade school where you can do, this boot camp concept in just maybe like a year or maybe 18 months and get job readiness training, and then boom, hit the industry immediately. And that's so cost effective that a lot of these, or at least I know of some trade schools that will offer zero cost. It's literally free to pursue this certificate or whatever nonsense that is that they give you. And the result of it is they just take a percent of your income. So basically, you go to the school for free for like a year and a half, and then you get a job, and then maybe they take, I don't know what percent it is, but a percent of your take-home income in the few years following once you actually get placed. That is such a better deal than a education, not to mention a graduate education. So there's my biases. I'm laying them out here. I definitely went to I didn't take my own advice. I went to a undergraduate school that is extremely expensive, very much in a higher education realm. However, that's my thought on that. I think if you don't know what you want to do, why are you doing a master's study? That doesn't make any sense to me. You should probably be exploring something, right? And trying it out. I feel like a graduate school is not the right context for that. But correct me if I'm wrong. There are a number of graduate schools that are game development focused programs. But then again, if you're going into that, you probably know at that point you want to do game dev. So that's all I have to say about that. So you're figuring it out. Okay. Well, and also I would say, hey man, if you're passionate about AI and ML, why go into game dev? Game development is not a great industry. It pays worse. The hours are worse. You've got less mobility with respect to career options, certainly with respect to where you're going to work, because unless you love the West Coast of the USA, you're probably going to have a hard time finding a place you want to live that also has, the income that you want, that also has, wherever your friends are and stuff. You're going to RIT, so I'm thinking maybe you're somebody who's based on the East Coast. There's not a lot of game dev opportunities on the East Coast, I'll tell you that. It's a lot harder to make the career happen on that coast, which is why I'm a California man now. It is what it is. But yeah, I would strongly encourage you to reconsider your plan, and just think through whether or not you are effectively chasing answers to the right questions. The other thing I would advise you to do, let's say you've already embarked on this graduate program, is to try and take gap quarters or gap semesters as much as possible. Try to do a gap, because a lot of internship programs will be contingent on the applicant, or the candidate, I should say, being enrolled within a 4-year degree or a graduate studies program. And so what you can do is you can enroll in that program, but then you can put it on pause and then do an internship. Put it on pause and then do some freelancing, do some contract work, try it out, see what you like. And then when you resume your education, you'll have so much greater context with respect to what problems you like to work on and what you want to focus on, in such a way that, like, I think it would be a real tragedy for somebody to go through a 4 or 5 year, maybe 6-year education, undergraduate, graduate program, and then hit the workforce and realize, oh shit, Maybe I don't even like the day to day. So I would definitely recommend hitting that internship grind ASAP. All right. That's all just your backstory. Let me get to the questions you asked. Question number one: when did you decide to pursue a career in game development? Um, I don't know. I think I'm still deciding, to be honest. I don't think it's a good industry. I really don't think this is a good place to make a career. It's something I would definitely be a little bit disappointed if my kids said, "Hey, I want to be a game dev." I think being an artist is cool. I'm passionate about art, but I don't love this industry. Um, I would say that I realized it was possible to be a game developer when I did my first internship. My first internship in the game development industry. So I was in college, and it was a freshman, and I went out to this company called Zynga, which is primarily a mobile game company, also known for a lot of Facebook gaming. And I worked on an internship there, which was a really cool internship program. I was part of a cohort. And it was kind of the first time in my life I was surrounded by, excuse me, I was surrounded by people who are just as passionate about games as I am. And that was a really awesome learning experience for me. So basically, I went to this program, I started doing the work, and that's when I realized, wow, this is possible. Which is kind of like what we were just saying. Like, I think you got to start with the internship, doing the day to day grind, and then you'll see, okay, is this the right fit for me? So when did I decide to pursue the career? I guess like I was passionate about coding as soon as I learned how to code, which is probably like middle school, high school. And then you could say from a perspective, I had started pursuing a career. I just didn't know it yet. And then, and even that, some of the first programs I made were games. So definitely games was kind of there from the forefront. I just didn't realize that games were kind of a viable career path, to the extent that it is, until I had actually started doing the work in the industry. So that's all I'll say about that. Okay, next question. What is your day to day work life as a freelancer and when you worked at these big companies? Okay, so that was the premise. That was the impetus of this video. I just gave you the day to day breakdown. Um, and this is me working at a big company. I've never worked full time as a freelancer, so I can't speak to that. But I have often moonlit as a game developer. Amazon is badass in that they empower their workers. They say, hey, you're allowed to make games in your free time as long as you're not using company resources, which I think is really, really cool. There's a number of companies where they don't do that. And they say, hey, if you make a game while working here, we're going to litigate against you, which is shit, right? That really sucks. How many games, Minecraft, came out of, somebody making their own games at the same time as working at like at a big game company, like I forget what, I think he was King, right? Notch. I think he came from King. But anyways, yeah. So that's kind of what it's like. As a freelancer, I guess, you're getting home maybe from your day job around like 6 or 7 p.m. And then you're probably doing a little freelance work from like maybe like 7 to 11 before you go to bed. So that's kind of what that schedule would look like. I'm not really on that grind right now, but in the periods of my life that I have been where I'm trying to make indie games, that's kind of the time frame that I'm operating in. Burning the midnight oil, a lot of late nights, which a lot of people will tell you it's hard to find the motivation to do that after doing a day job, but that's kind of what it takes if you also want to have an income at the same time. Okay, so the next question is, how is AI and ML getting involved within the industry, and how do you think I could prepare myself to apply the skills I will be learning? Hmm. Well, I certainly would not expect to find those answers in university. I think that university is really good at teaching um, what has been studied and understood, but rarely, I think, are university classes being like taught on what's kind of the cutting edge technologies. I feel like instead it's like, okay, here's something that we know, and then maybe you could try something novel. And I mean, they have a name for when you do something novel. It's called a PhD, right? The PhD thesis is really the only point, when you're kind of creating something new. Prior to that, you're just studying. Um, though I'm sure people for their master's theses have also kind of created stuff. But I mean, primarily that's kind of like the whole idea behind a PhD. So I would say that but then the thing is, a lot of PhD papers, as you know, are not getting implemented into game dev at all, right? There's a lot of like stuff that people will do, and it just doesn't work in a real time environment, or it doesn't work within the constraints that we're in game dev. So I think those are all factors to consider. So the question is, how is AI and ML getting involved within the industry? Well, I mean, I would definitely say that AI and ML have always been involved in the industry. The games industry has always been kind of bleeding edge, you know, cutting edge technology, as they say. And so primarily that has all happened within the realm of the content generation framework. So kind of I should let me take that word back. What I should say is the content generation stage of a project. So you're making a project, you're doing a lot of work, and then you've got the runtime environment of when the project actually goes. A lot of AI and ML has always happened um, in that generation stage. So, for example, I mean, any tools you use like Photoshop, those are what people are using in order to make the content for the game. And then there are, damn it, I forget the name of the 3D modeling program. Oh, Houdini, that's what it is. Then there's 3D modeling programs like Houdini, which is what they use like to build the city of Spider-Man, the Sony games, right? And that is a lot of like procedural generation technology. The thing is, these things take a lot of time, and often the results of procedural driven technology are not frankly very compelling. So it's usually the case that an artist will want to do something procedural to cut down on man hours, um, and then they'll curate that content. So procedural driven curated content is very popular within like game development. It's rare that kind of you'll see a full game that's just procedural because frankly they're just not super compelling. It's just as compelling if you would go in a chat GPT and say write me a novel and then read it, right? It's probably not going to be very good. It probably needs a little bit of editing and some creativity in order to kind of make it a compelling piece of work, right? Um, so that's what I'll say about that. So basically, how is it getting involved in the industry? So I would say what's kind of if there is a new paradigm shift, it's probably in the realm of kind of how can we surface these technologies or services to the runtime environment so that maybe a player can engage with them within a runtime environment. So I don't know of a ton of games that are honestly doing that. Um, like kind of games that integrate ChatGPT. I think there's a lot of experiments, but we will see. We will see kind of in the next generation of games because kind of this just came out, right? And games usually take 5 years to make. So I would say that if you wait and see like 5 years, we'll see kind of what the results of this have been. Like usually games are kind of on a bit of a delay like that. So I think we're still waiting to see. So far, I haven't really seen a lot of compelling experiments, to be honest, within this industry. It's definitely not one I'm really bullish on. Um, I think it's kind of more of a, at least as far as it relates to our industry, I think it's super valuable in terms of the content generation. But in terms of like runtime procedural content, I'm not really convinced that's going to be very compelling because I feel that it's really just a certain kind of game that is like a chaotic kind of sandbox game that's really going to be relevant. Um, if you had sort of procedural generated missions within God of War or The Last of Us or I don't know, insert or Call of Duty, right? Would that be interesting and compelling? I think probably not. I think there's a few games where it would work well, but I think the majority of our industry that is kind of more film leaning, more story leaning, more plot leaning, versus the gameplay ludology side of things, I feel like it's just lesser and lesser relevancy because it's more focused on like the creative vision of a particular artist. So those are my thoughts. I think it's an interesting technology, but I haven't really seen very many interesting things with it. Similar to kind of the recent, I mean, this is kind of the current fad, right? But like there was a previous fad with something called blockchain technologies. And did it shake up the industry? Not really. Most people didn't really care. So we'll see what happens, but I'm probably not bullish on the technology. I think that if you are interested in the games industry and particular in AI and ML, like in terms of this kind of new generative AI kind of stuff, then probably focusing on the tooling and kind of the engine side of things, see what Unreal's doing. That would be kind of more interesting than the kind of stuff that I do, which is I don't develop engines, I develop games. So it's a different kind of product within the ecosystem. We use the engines to make the games, but it's a different thing. And then on the topic of AI, you said, how is AI getting involved in the industry? So, I mean, we're talking right now about generative AI, but non-generative AI like behavior trees and finite state machines have been around in games since the Turing machine itself. This is a fundamental part of games. Like, how do the bots, how does the NPC think, the AI? Um, if you're interested in studying that, I would say you're going to want to look at finite state machines. Of course, they're kind of the bedrock of all AI in games. There's other systems like behavior trees, which operate in a slightly different framework and are useful for certain technologies, but for the most part, finite state machines are still kind of the bread and butter, just because they're stateful, just because they're predictive. It's a lot more the case that somebody wants to say, how do I get from this state to this state, rather than saying, given this amorphous set of weights, how do I want the AI to make a decision? It's usually the case that you want this kind of curated content, which goes back to the procedural discussion. But yeah, so there's behavior trees, and then there's kind of more, let's say, experimental AI frameworks that have never really been widely adopted because they haven't ever really been widely necessary, such as GOAPS, Goal-Oriented Action Planning Systems, GOAPS. There are games that use them. Everybody references that Fear game that used all this cool tech, but it never really caught on because finite state machines are usually all you need, and you can create really compelling, cinematic, interesting gameplay experiences with just that. And so kind of going the extra mile and kind of creating these things where you don't know what the AI is going to do is usually not desired. Usually, as somebody who's creating an experience, you want to know what's going to be experienced and when, because that way you can build an arc, you can build a plot. So it's kind of rare that we get into AI beyond that. It's frankly not very common. Of course, if you're checking out maybe some stuff, you can check out the Game Developer Conference, Experimental Gameplay Workshop, or the AI Summit series. There's definitely people who are exploring concepts there. It's just not really a huge factor wide adoption. So those are my thoughts on that. All right, so that answers all the questions David had for me. Hope this video was helpful for you, David, or anyone else who's decided to come along for the ride and listen in. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. And for more videos like this, hit subscribe. All right, I'll catch you guys later. Bye.